Hi and welcome to Tazeen TV. Now today we're going to be looking at the modern woman and the menopause. My guest joining me is going to be helping us debunk some of the myths and look at how we can figure out this issue for any woman over the age of 30. For any of you women experiencing depression, anxiety, acute irritability, irregular periods, and similar to me have that demon in your brain beating yourself up about how you're feeling, stay tuned for this conversation. Thank you so much, Ghazala, for joining me this morning. For those not familiar with Ghazala, she is member of the British Menopause Society and one of the team of doctors at the Marion Gluck Clinic. Ghazala, I wanted to say thank you. It's so brilliant, first of all, to meet a Asian woman who is a specialist in this field. It's truly brilliant that you can shed some light for us on this issue today, with a particular view that we'll look and explore how these perimenopause or menopause symptoms might vary for the Asian woman. Let's kick off, Ghazala, with the age and the symptoms. What age do women start to come into the perimenopause or menopause? And typically, what are the main symptoms that they experience?
Women come into the perimenopause, which is the period of time leading up to the menopause, and it can be a number of years. It's on average 4 to 8 years, and it usually starts in the early 40s, but for some women it can start at the age of 35. We know that about 1% of women can have premature menopause at the age of 40, so their perimenopause, is 5 years earlier. And perimenopause is when the body starts to have anovulatory cycles. We are not producing as much progesterone in the second half of our cycle. And it's progesterone that's the hormone that is deficient in the perimenopausal period. We're usually producing quite a bit of estrogen and sometimes producing more estrogen, and the levels are fluctuating, but overall progesterone is on a slow decline, and it's this imbalance between the estrogen and the low progesterone that creates a lot of the symptoms of the perimenopause, and they're fluctuant.
What I was going to say is just the fact that you've mentioned that it can start in the 40s. Now, weirdly, a few years ago, I actually started to notice some of the symptoms. So I started to get actually really depressed. I noticed tinnitus, that turned up for me, exhaustion, brain fog, achy muscles, my energy levels was changing. And I remember I went to the doctor and they were testing me for rheumatology. They were testing me for, I went to see an ear specialist with a view that I might have a tumor in my ear to deal with the tinnitus. And so I was kind of going left, right and center. And I was even given an antidepressant prescription by the GP. And I think what shocked me was this age factor. Like I kind of thought, well, it can't be perimenopause or menopause because that doesn't come in until you're 50 or at least in your late 40s. So it can start in your 40s, maybe even earlier.
It can start in your 30s, but definitely by your 40s, women are beginning to experience symptoms of the perimenopause. So some of the symptoms you're talking to me about, I'm thinking, yes, that's definitely perimenopausal. So depression and low mood, that is very much related to progesterone. So progesterone is our natural antidepressant, and we call it the happy hormone. So that's why women bloom in pregnancy, because they have very high levels of progesterone. It makes you feel good. And there is an actual scientific basis behind that, because progesterone is metabolized into something called allopregnenolone, and that has an impact on the GABA neurotransmitter in your brain. And GABA is a neurotransmitter that calms your brain down. It calms the whole body down. It makes you feel relaxed. So if you don't have enough progesterone, you are definitely going to start experiencing those symptoms. So the most common symptoms that people often present to us in perimenopause are insomnia. They can't sleep at night, and low mood and irritability, feeling very tearful, feeling very emotional. And then we've also talked about how estrogen levels fluctuate widely. So there are times when you've got very high estrogen levels and low progesterone levels. And actually, we know that estrogen and progesterone, they're like yin and yang. They work in conjunction with each other. So estrogen is, responsible for all the sort of things that give you your feminine characteristics, and progesterone is kind of more in the supporting role. And we know that they need to be in an optimum ratio for you to feel well. So when you've got too much estrogen and too little progesterone, you get symptoms of estrogen dominance, and so brain fog, feeling exhausted, breast tenderness, worsening PMS. These are all symptoms of estrogen dominance that women will often experience in the perimenopausal period. And I see so many women who are misdiagnosed in this period of time. So essentially aches and pains, you're off to rheumatology, get an x-ray of your hip, and it's like, you're only 45, you can't have osteoarthritis.
Thank you. And I just wanted to really, thank you, because it wasn't until actually you and I had a chat where I ran through the symptoms that you actually restored my sanity. Because up until then, I actually thought I'm going slightly crazy with everything that was going on, and not knowing if it was perimenopause or the onset of menopause. And I want to come on to the testing and how we actually women, and if there is a difference, like if you're Asian, white, black, does that make a bearing on when the symptoms might start?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we know that there are genetic differences, and there are differences. So women, it depends on what age you had your first child. It can depend on your BMI, the ratio between your weight and your height. There's been a study done in the States called the SWAN study. It's still ongoing, and it's called the Study of Women's Health Across the Nations, and it's looking at women between the ages of 40 and 55, and it looked at their menopausal symptoms. And we know that African American women have menopause at much lower age, about 49, as do the Hispanics, and the average Caucasian woman is about 51. And even their experience of the perimenopause, Black women can have perimenopause that can last a lot longer. And they can have 50% of them experience hot flushes for greater than 10 years. So we know also that stress plays a massive role. So, we can look at, what factors, can be more stressful for people, who are ethnic minorities living in different countries, what causes them to feel more stressed overall. In India and Pakistan, the average age of menopause is 46.2. Now, I don't know whether our generation, when we move over to countries, other countries, whether, because of changes in our socioeconomic status, whether that, the age of menopause becomes more in line with what the local people would have. But certainly there seem to be quite vast differences. We know that Asian women, Japanese, Chinese women, they experience far fewer symptoms of the menopause. And whether, I don't even know whether it's recognized in their culture. So, it could also be, that Asian women tend to be more repressed emotionally. That's a cultural thing where we're very often expected to put others before ourselves, not think about ourselves. Self-care isn't really a concept, and the elderly are veneered, so it's not such a bad thing to become old. Whereas I think there is a huge pressure in the Western world for women to remain young and gorgeous forever, and that's what is given more emphasis rather than oh well, what have you achieved in your 50 years, where are you, what's your wisdom, what life events have you been through and you've coped with.
I also want to explore with you patriarchy and what seems to be quite a male dominated medical and food industry, and what women like you and your contemporaries can shine light on in how women might choose to support themselves very differently through their lifespan of living with these hormonal changes that are actually very natural,
we'll start off with just a very quick resume of the menstrual cycle. So we have hormones produced from our brain, the pituitary gland, so that's follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which influence our ovaries. So at the beginning of our cycle, follicle stimulating hormone stimulates your ovaries to get the egg ready, and it causes estrogen levels to rise. And when the estrogen levels rise at ovulation, the egg is released, ready for fertilization. Estrogen also causes the lining of the womb to thicken and ready for implantation if that egg is fertilized. And progesterone is then produced by the body of the egg, the corpus luteum, and progesterone also helps stabilize the lining of the womb ready for implantation. Now, if implantation doesn't happen, what happens is that the estrogen levels and progesterone levels fall, and that's when we get our periods. So we've talked about estrogen and progesterone working together. Now, in the perimenopausal period, what happens is that we start getting anovulatory cycles. So essentially, some cycles the egg is not released, so you don't get progesterone produced, and that cycle you had estrogen because your body's trying to get that egg released, but your progesterone didn't happen, it went offline. So that's when you start getting that imbalance between the estrogen and the progesterone. And then, as we've talked about already, it's progesterone that is a very, very important hormone for your emotional well-being, for to help you sleep, to help your body feel relaxed. So that's when you start getting these imbalances.
So bear with me. So progesterone is kind of the well-being hormone. It's the one that's a happy hormone, right? Yeah. And estrogen, because I actually thought estrogen was really good for like immunity, for our hair. So, yeah. Tell me more about, you know, the well-beingness of estrogen.
So estrogen is really important for our cardiovascular health. It helps keep the lining of the blood vessels elastic. It prevents plaques forming on there. It's very important for our immune system. It's very important for our bone health. All of the hormones are important for our bone health, the sex hormones, but estrogen particularly. And it's also important for our brain health. Estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are neurosteroids. They are massively important for brain function. And we know that women who take HRT have a reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. They have a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. They have a reduced risk of osteoporosis. We also know that estrogen is very important for your hair and your skin. So because it promotes collagen production.
Okay, because I want to really go into this, because there are so many myths around HRT, and, you know, the links with cancer, the links with breast cancer. I mean, you know, one of the reasons, Ghazala, since I realized I was in the perimenopausal stage myself, I haven't gone for HRT because my mother sadly has breast cancer. It returned, and I am, without swearing, really scared that I go on to HRT, I can't come off. That, you know, it's a bit like going on the pill for me. It's like the risk between being given hormones and cancer is this huge fear that I hold. And yet actually what I've also realized, I don't really know. I don't know the information. It's just on beliefs that someone somewhere has said. I think my mother said it, and I think someone else said it. And so I was like, oh yeah, that must be true. So I kind of really want to break it down. Before we get to that, I just want to kind of also ask you, so when you've talked about these fluctuating hormones, I mean, is there a chemical test? Is there a bit like a pregnancy test? Can I go pee on a test stick and find out if I'm definitely perimenopausal or menopausal?
Yes, we can. I mean, we can definitely assess the perimenopause. So if you have a 28-day cycle, we can check your bloods around day 21, and at day 21, we will then look to see how much progesterone did you produce and how much estrogen did you produce. So we can look at the ratio between the estrogen and progesterone.
And
that's through a blood
testing, right? Okay, got it.
You can do that, or you can actually do urine testing. Now, this is not mainstream in the NHS, but in the private sector, we have a test called the Dutch test, which looks at the urine metabolites of your sex hormones. So through a Dutch test at day 21, we can look at what are your hormones doing. The advantage of the blood test, though, is that we can also look at your follicle stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormone, which are the ones that come from your brain. And they're the ones, there's a sort of feedback loop. So if you're producing enough hormones from your ovaries, the levels of FSH and LH are lower. But if you're not producing a lot of hormones from your ovaries, the FSH and LH rise because they're trying to get your ovary to produce more. So there's like a feedback loop and those hormones go up. So we can actually see someone who is in the perimenopause, they might be having regular periods, but we can see that their FSH and LH are high, which means that their body's struggling to produce those hormones. It's not happening in a smooth flow. So there is definitely testing that we can do.
When is the point that you then do the official testing versus actually listening to the symptoms to get clarity on if the testing is appropriate?
Sure. So, I mean, I think all doctors should, number one, listen to the patient. The problem is, in the National Health Service, we're so, strapped for time. We hardly have any time. There's a huge move towards telemedicine, online access. So that kind of doctor-patient relationship where, you know the patient, so you know that the symptoms that they're experiencing are different. So I think, if you can find, it's great if you can find a doctor who is actually who knows you and who can listen to your symptoms. In the private sector, we will do a 45-minute consultation. So, we've got plenty of time to listen in an initial consultation to what the patient is experiencing, and also tying it in with the rest of their history. So we're looking at family history, we're looking at what age did their mum go through the menopause, we're looking at what other medical problems do you have, what are your ideas and beliefs about HRT and hormones, because that also ties in with how you're experiencing things and what else is going on in your life. So I think it's really important to listen to the patient, but also to get the holistic picture of that patient and how they're experiencing their life.
It's interesting because you talk about, the NHS and how it works there. And my own experience was they don't actually do the test. Because I went to ask and they were like, well, you're too young. So
I mean, this is one area that, I'm very proud of our NHS, and I think it's great that, everyone has access to healthcare. But when it comes to the menopause, now that I've had a lot of additional training and I work in the private sector, I really feel that there are a lot of areas that we could definitely improve on in the NHS. And one of them is testing. So actually the NICE guidelines, so that's the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, that's the guidelines that, most of the NHS follow. It actually says that over the age of 45, you don't have to do any blood tests. So actually a lot of GPs just don't do them. They won't do them. And they will put you on a blanket HRT preparation. Now, what's really important to understand is that if you're estrogen dominant, like we've already talked about, and your estrogen levels are quite high relative to your progesterone, if we give you a blanket preparation of estrogen and progesterone, you're going to feel awful because you're getting more estrogen. So actually, it doesn't always work. So what happens is that women are given these without much follow-up. It's like, here, have some of these, and then they feel awful, and then they stop. Because I think everyone's experience is quite individual.
I want us to come back to the whole myth around HRT, because I think subconsciously this is preventing a lot of women like myself from even asking or wanting to ask for it. So let's take it slowly, go through HRT, body identical, and then bioidentical.
Okay. So bioidentical hormones have been around for a long time, but conventional HRT that women were given, in the last few decades was largely synthetic HRT made of synthetic estrogens that came from pregnant horses' urine and synthetic progestogens, which are called progestogens. And progestogens and synthetic estrogens were often given orally in preparations for HRT. So synthetic hormones are hormones that are similar in structure to our natural hormones, but have similar actions, but are structurally slightly different. Whereas bioidentical hormones, they have the identical molecular or chemical structure to our natural body hormones. So that is bioidentical. So bioidentical hormones have been around for decades, but they, until recently, it wasn't really recognized. But recently, it has been recognized that the bioidentical hormones are the best treatment for our bodies when it comes to HRT. And we do get bioidentical preparations available on the NHS. So the NHS bioidenticals are called body identicals, but they are essentially they are the same. They are bioidentical, so the same in structure, but they're called body identical.
HRT is the pregnant horses.
So synthetic HRT is made out of so Premarin. That was pregnant horses' urine. And things like medroxyprogesterone and those ones were synthetic. So they are similar, but not the same. And they are made by big pharma companies because there's a huge amount of profit to be made in these synthetic hormones that they can get patents on. Actually, the problem is that natural estrogen and progesterone are cheap as chips. So there's no incentive on pharma companies to run big controlled clinical trials to confirm their safety and efficacy.
Let's just pause there, because this is actually quite massive for us as women to understand. We have a medical system that's been governed and run by men. We've got a food industry that's also run by profit and greed, similar to the medical system. And so the way that we as women have potentially been approached by the medical system is, you got a problem, let's give you HRT. There's huge profit in HRT. And essentially it's run and controlled with big pharma. So it's licensed, it's regulated, and it's the approved thumbs up that we women have been taking for decades. And yet it's synthetic, which is similar in structure, but it's actually structurally different to the needs of the hormones in our body. Did I get this?
Yeah, no, you got that. I mean, in all fairness now, there is, the NHS, there are lots of guidelines now that say that the bioidenticals, so the body identicals you get on the National Health Service, are the best ones to go. So if your GP is informed,
what they're made of. Sorry, just tell me what they're made of.
So the ones you get on the NHS, things like estrogel, things like Everol patches, LS Solo patches, these are bioidentical estrogens, so they are good for you. So most GPs should be aware that these are the ones they should be giving you. The problem with the body identicals or bioidenticals you get on the National Health Service, we have more limited doses and more limited ways of delivering those. The only natural progesterone you can get on the NHS is oral micronized progesterone. So the only way you can take your progesterone in the National Health Service is through an oral capsule at night, or in an unlicensed way you can use it vaginally. But that means there's only one type. Now, even in my practice,
what's it made of, Ghazala? They're not made from the pregnant horse's urine. What are they?
No. They come from Mexican yams and soya. So they are natural plant sterols. Now, people think, you just literally stick those in your NutriBullet and that's your preparation. It's not. They have to be extracted from the yams and from the soya beans, and then they are synthesized in a laboratory. Now, everyone thinks, they're natural. They obviously don't have side effects, but they are active hormones. So they need to be administered by someone who knows what they're doing with them, and you need to be followed up. So they are active hormones.
And they're structurally
identical. Yeah, they're completely identical to the structure of the hormones in our body. So in fact, I think they are better tolerated. They do have fewer side effects. And I think, So I think it's great that now we do have bioidenticals available on the NHS, and there's lots of doctors who are really doing lots of good work on promoting the NHS use of bioidentical hormones. So Dr. Louise Newsom, for instance, they're promoting that these are the best treatments you can get on the NHS.
I want to come back to this whole concept about licensing and regulated, particularly because what I've understood, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've understood from you is, so you've got your conventional HRT, that's your synthetic pregnant horse's urine, but it's structurally very different to the hormones in a woman's body.
Yeah.
We then have, and we're able to get it through the NHS, so we could arguably go and ask the doctor.
Definitely.
Education point, everyone listening, you are entitled to go and ask your doctor for the but it's called in the NHS body identical HRT, which is natural, coming from Mexican yams, and I believe you said natural plants, right?
And soybean as well.
And soybean, thank you. And these are structurally more aligned with how hormones feature in a woman's body. From what I've understood, it's interesting because Susan Treadgold, an holistic executive life coach that I've interviewed, who had breast cancer incidentally, she's been telling me about a multivitamin that she takes that's only available in the US at the moment, and it's called Euphoria. And so where you and I might take vitamin D, vitamin C, iron, zinc, magnesium, all these vitamins, and we're taking, say, 2 tablets or 1 tablet a day, it's not necessarily in the right percentage required for our DNA. Now, Euphoria have come out with a pill where they actually test your DNA, they formulate the pill for you that's got all the different vitamins and minerals in the exact percentage and composition that your body needs. So you don't need to buy 50 different types of vitamins and spend hundreds and thousands a year. You actually just get the one Euphoria pill that's got it all for you. And the reason I talk about that is because I'm starting to glean that perhaps the difference, as you've described, with the body identical sounds like you go to the GP, you ask for that, and it's like us taking these multivitamins, but we're not quite sure exactly what percentage of it we need for our DNA. Whereas the bioidentical sounds like you're doing that work for us to figure out, let's fine tune it and give the exact prescription required for you as an individual.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's correct. So in the NHS, it's largely a one size fits all. So, I mean, we can, but with the estrogen preparations, we can twiddle those about a bit. I mean, you can get 0.25 milligram patches going up to the gel's got 0.75, and you can take 4 pumps of the gel, and that will give you a higher dose. So we've got quite a lot of flexibility on the estrogen. But the progesterone, we have no flexibility. There's only 1 dose at night. And in the private sector, what we will do is we do quite detailed blood tests. We also check for DHEA, which is an adrenal hormone, which is a precursor to the sex hormones. So very often that can be reduced, and that, giving people a little bit of DHA can boost their hormones in general, and it means that we need to use lower doses of the other hormones, and we tend to start people on lower doses and work up according to what symptom benefits they're getting and what their individual needs are. So I think because we aim more for balance rather than a blanket preparation, I think they do tend to work better. Now, a lot of people find the oral progesterone too strong, and it's a 100 milligram dose. We can compound it in the private sector to 50 milligram capsules, and we can give progesterone transdermally. So we can give the estrogen and the progesterone in a cream, or we can give in a lozenge form, which is sublingual. So you put the lozenge between your gum and your cheek, and it just dissolves in half an hour, and then that's absorbed into your circulation. Now, the synthetic HRTs that we talked about from the horse's urine, they were oral preparations. We now know that really and truly we should not be using oral preparations. We should be using transdermal, because they have an increased risk of strokes and blood clots. So we know that we should be going for transdermal preparations. That's really, really important for people to understand. And the controlled clinical trials that have been done, where the NHS are using this evidence, is that if you're using transdermal natural estrogen and oral micronized progesterone, there's no increased risk of breast cancer for 5 years of use. And after the 5 years, it's a very, very minimal risk of breast cancer. Now, you've got to remember the risk in the general population is about 1 in 6. So it's quite a high risk condition anyway, okay, relatively speaking.
Let's slow down here. And I want to slow down because you've raised a couple of things. I want to get to it all, but let's just start with this myth around HRT and breast cancer. Now, my limited understanding, and you need to correct me about this, Ghazala, is that actually there was a study done 18 years ago that was inconclusive, and it was misreported in the media, that brought this risk association of HRT and cancer. So let's go into this, because what's happened in the last 18 years, that is going to debunk this myth.
Sure. So that study you're referring to is called the Women's Health Initiative, and that was in 2002. And it was really badly designed. I mean, it's unbelievable that, it's had such a big impact. So the women they recruited to this trial were, in general, postmenopausal. So they were in their 60s. A lot of them had pre-existing comorbidities, things like diabetes, heart disease. And so they were recruited into the trial, and the trial was stopped prematurely because these women who were taking the HRT were getting side effects. There was an increased risk of strokes, heart disease, breast cancer. So immediately, there was this huge furore, newspaper headlines, and lots of women were taken off their HRT. And I don't know how that permeated across the whole world, where actually, HRT was given a bad press. I mean, these were also synthetic hormones that people were taking. And, it was then, well, only take it if you absolutely need it, take it only for the shortest time possible. And if you can manage without it, because the side effects and the risks are too high. And there's a whole generation of doctors who have been brought up in that culture. I qualified as a GP in 1995. And basically, HRT was all the rage then. And then, within a few years, the tables had been turned. And even recently, there was an article in the Lancet last summer. They did a retrospective analysis of all of those old trials and came up with, yes, there is a slightly increased risk of breast cancer. And again, it was like, we'll use the minimum amount of HRT, not longer than 5 or 10 years. Then you've got to stop. There's an increased risk of breast cancer. So there is a slightly increased risk of breast cancer, but it's really important to remember that breast cancer is the 6th commonest killer of women. The number 1 killer is cardiovascular disease. So in the bid to stop number 6, we ignore the top 5, and we know that that HRT has huge long-term benefits for women's health. I mean, it's just, even in general, when you're looking at breast cancer risks, you've got to break it down. And women who are obese, or who don't exercise, or who drink a lot of alcohol, they have a way higher risk of breast cancer than the women who are on HRT. And the thing about HRT is that it can be it can be so beneficial in people's well-being that they exercise more, they feel better, they have better self-esteem, they're looking after themselves more. So they reverse a lot of their risk of breast cancer through their improved lifestyle measures. And I think the other thing we've got to remember that all of these studies have been done on conventional preparations. There are not so many studies that have been done on the bioidentical regimes. We need a lot more research in looking at the long-term impacts. But we know, largely from experience, that the bioidenticals in, physiological doses tend to have good outcomes. The other thing is that when you're having HRT, it's really important to have regular monitoring. So in the National Health Service, we have mammograms every 3 years. It's important to keep an eye on your breast health. If you've got any increased risk factors, you could have more frequent testing, more frequent examinations. We also, in the private sector, we will do pelvic ultrasound, so we also look at the health of your uterus and your ovaries. Now, one of the controversies about bioidenticals is that the British Menopause Society do actually say, they advise against it, because they're saying that the body identicals you get on the NHS should be enough. And the problem with bioidenticals is they are available online and they're not regulated. You have to be very careful about where you get your bioidentical hormones from.
So it's, again, reassuring to women who might not have thousands to spend on bioidentical hormones that you can go to your GP and explore body identical, because you're getting the same thing that's in a bioidentical, but perhaps you're not getting the right formulaic breakdown for you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there's affordability issue, which
absolutely, and
particularly at the moment, this year particularly, and we want people to be informed and look at their overall wellness. And I want to come back to wellness, Ghazala, particularly with your functional medicine background, and I really want to explore that more fully with you. But I want you to talk about what you just touched upon, which is this whole issue around regulation and licensing. So before, when you were speaking and you were sharing, you were talking about, licensed products, and now you're talking about regulated products. So what is the difference? And tell me more about those who are interested in bioidentical. Should they be concerned around this whole licensing regulatory issue?
Sure. So essentially, it's really, if you're going to go for the bioidentical hormones in the private sector, you have to go to a regulated a specialist pharmacy that is regulated. So the Marion Gluck specialist pharmacy, we are registered, regulated, and we comply with the set standards of the General Pharmaceutical Council. And the materials and products are approved by the MHRA, which is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulation Agency. So all the things we're using are approved and the pharmacy is licensed. So there's very close checks on when we say that this cream has got 0.25 milligrams of estrogen in 0.3 mils, that is accurate. Now, a lot of the stuff you get on the internet, we don't know. I mean, we have people who come to the clinic who've bought things online, and actually we measure their levels and they're sky high because they've been taking unregulated products. So I think it's really important to understand that going to a bioidentical hormone clinic where they're attached to a specialist pharmacy who are regulated, it's absolutely okay. Now, the other controversy that the British Menopause Society bring up about bioidenticals is that they think that the transdermal progesterones don't provide enough endometrial protection. So they think that the lining of the womb is not adequately protected by, it's not absorbed enough. So we do check that, and every year we do a pelvic ultrasound and we check to see the lining of the womb. And also in the private sector, we will also use the licensed preparation. So if there's a woman who we think is not getting enough endometrial protection with transdermals, we can give her the oral micronized progesterone that you can get on the NHS. We can also prescribe it. So we tend to tailor things to each individual woman's needs. I think lots of people will attest to the benefits of the testosterone that we can give. They say, oh, it's a special sauce on the menu, like it really does help them. And DHEA as well, so the adrenal hormone, that can also just give people a sense of well-being. And just, you know, for my own personal interest, patients that I've seen, you know, in my NHS clinic who've got autoimmune conditions and they've got menopause, I have checked their DHEA level, and their DHEA level is really low. We know that DHEA is a real measure of physiological age and your immunity status. So I think there is some correlation. Now, we're only just starting to think about DHEA in the NHS. Now, in the NHS, we can actually get DHEA vaginal pessaries. It's called.
That's from Australia, is that right?
No, there is a testosterone preparation that you can get from Australia that can be used for women, but I mean, I have not come across it in my practice, you know, someone who's been able to get hold of that. Usually in the menopause clinics from the NHS, they will usually prescribe Testogel, which is 50 milligrams in one sachet, or Tostran, which is 10 milligrams in one pump. And those are preparations that are really licensed for men, not for women. So very often, if someone's been to a menopause clinic, they come back to their GP, the GPs may be very reluctant to prescribe the unlicensed medication, and they won't do it. So there's a real, you know, there's a real grey area here. But I think that, you know, we know that it's hugely beneficial.
Well, it's interesting because when you say that like testosterone's not licensed, then I think the mind or people may go to, oh, well, it's not licensed, so it's not safe. But this is...
I know. The problem is to get a license, you have to have controlled clinical trials. And the thing is that these controlled clinical trials haven't been done because testosterone is cheap. You know, if a pharma company runs a trial on, you know, 16,000 women, you know, doing a testosterone trial, they're not going to make any money. They're going to spend loads of money, but they're not going to make a lot of money back. So because it's cheap, it's not an expensive medication.
Do you think if the man was in the same position that Big Pharma would make the same decision?
Probably, I would have thought so. Yeah, I mean, this is the other thing that I find quite fascinating about, you know, women's health and integrative women's health. The amount of research is so lacking on women's health issues. It's really scary. I mean, you know,
what motivated you to go into this field, actually?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, for instance, you know, in the private sector, we always give progesterone. We've now talked about how important progesterone is as a hormone. It's not just to protect the lining of the womb. It actually works with estrogen. We also know that, you know, where estrogen causes breast tissue to grow, progesterone actually causes it to regress. So it's really quite important to have progesterone. So in the NHS, for a woman who's had a hysterectomy, they do not get progesterone, they only get estrogen. So they're kind of like in a you know, perpetual estrogen dominance because there's no progesterone. Whereas in the private sector, we will give hysterectomized women estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and potentially DHEA. So I think that they definitely do better with all of that. You know, I've seen a few women in the NHS where, you know, they're hysterectomized, they've only been on progesterone and on estrogen, and they've put on masses of weight. And one of them actually became diabetic because she'd gained so much weight due to this estrogen dominance of only being on estrogen that the weight then made her insulin resistant, and she became diabetic. We know that progesterone actually improves insulin sensitivity.
Okay, I really want to go through now some of the, I mean, just already, you know, the fact that you've helped explore breast cancer and HRT, and I read that there was a subsequent analysis of women actually from that report 18 years ago, where they were given estrogen only HRT, and they had 25% less risk, a lower risk.
Exactly.
Information not more out there, but what I really want to explore is what everything you've just touched upon and the modern woman. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of different layers to this, Ghazala. I want to start with being Muslim. Both you and I are from the Islamic tradition. And I want to start with how women and their whole menstrual cycle has been treated, and the beliefs that are very, very deep. They've run through centuries and generations, actually, of beliefs that then actually bring us to the present day, whereby we get into this link of a natural aging process and a denial of what losing fertility and being less fertile as a woman means today. But let's kick off with being, this Islamic belief. And I mean, my own experience, Ghazala, is as a young girl, as soon as you come into puberty, there's a massive belief that you're impure, dirty, you can't enter a place of prayer, you can't go to a graveyard, you can't even touch the most sacred text for Muslims, the Quran. And yet this process gives life. And I touch on Rumi, who says women are a ray of God, they are creative and not created. So somewhere along the line between women giving birth and periods enable us to do that, procreate and continue the human race, to somehow this natural process ordained by God is dirty and you're almost a leper. I mean, in India, even in the Hindu religion, lower caste women, there are activities that they get restricted on for their own earning and survival because they have their period. What's your own experience about all of this as a Muslim woman?
Well, I guess, I was brought up to, there wasn't a stigma associated with periods in my family, but definitely it was like, well, you can't read namaz when you've got your period, you can't fast, you can't read the Quran. So, you're exempt from all of those things because there was this thing that you're unclean. I mean, it was like you're unclean. But I guess I didn't really think about it too deeply then, but now I'm sort of reflecting and I'm thinking, oh my God, actually those negative ideas have been put into our brains from quite an early age, really, that the periods are negative.
You've got a couple of hadith, haven't you?
Yes, well, we just looked one up. And it says, one of the hadith says, the menstruating woman and the one who is in a state of impurity should not recite anything of the Quran. But then we also discovered that there are certain scholars who will dispute that because a hadith is not exactly, it's basically an interpretation of what the Quran is saying. So I think some of it could be interpretation.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt, but I should just clarify to those unfamiliar with the terminology hadith. Hadith are the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but they're not sacred texts, they're not law by any form. Obviously this goes into a whole debate about jurisprudence and the lack of it over the years. That's a whole separate discussion, but as you rightly say, you could argue it two sides. You could argue both sides of the coin on this one, right?
Absolutely. And it also goes on, it's also about your role as a woman, what your role is within the family. It's very much about, your self-care is not that important. It's very much a tradition of looking after everyone else, being a good wife, being a good daughter, being a good mother. You're kind of right on the back burner. So I think people, we're not brought up to really think about our own well-being necessarily, and again, where we're talking about ethnic differences, we're saying Asian women perceive their menopausal symptoms less. I mean, partly maybe it's a good thing, but partly I think it's also the repression that's ingrained in this kind of philosophy that has an impact on how you perceive your own symptoms.
Well, this also then touches upon this concept of women need to be immortally young forever. I mean, this is just utter nonsense. And I remember, Ghazala, it was really funny, like a couple of years ago when my symptoms began, and even today, I was kind of fighting this inner voice of grief. It was like, oh no, I'm getting old. And I realized for myself, wow, I've internalized the glossy magazines, the fashion magazines, the media, and all these kind of, you know, men in power who replace the aging model for the upgraded younger model. And it started to bring to heart, wow, what, you know, the questions I started to ask myself is, what do I believe about being an aging woman? What, and all of the things this brings up for me. And there's almost like this idiot compassion that you're met with. Oh, I think I'm going through perimenopause. Oh, poor you. And it just made me, again, do a bit more research and find the examples, like in Native Americans, it's the aging menopausal women, the majority of whom are invited onto the Council of Elders because their innate wisdom and intuition that opens during this incredibly spiritual experience and time is fully open. And one of the things that I started to connect with is a lot of repressed emotions, experiences, beliefs that I haven't resolved up until now in my life have come up with an absolute vengeance. And it started to make me realize this period of transition is like a caterpillar going into that cocoon where it's happening for a reason, and we are, you know, it's a menopause, middle pause, reflect, and then step forward. And sorry, I wanted to get your wisdom on this, because you touched on it earlier, right? This relationship with the cortisol and all the different hormones. And then this gets linked into belief around, should we have the hormone? And I know for some of the men that I've spoken to about maybe going on HRT or BRHT, they're like, why do you want to take something for what's a natural process? And that brought up another layer of this subconditional, oh, well, I can't get the support because then I'm denying what women have gone through for centuries and they've never needed it, so why do I?
Well, I think number one, we've got to look at our increased life expectancy. I mean, you know, now a woman born in 2020 can expect to live till she's 100. And in just a century ago, Victorian women were dying in childbirth. You didn't make it to beyond 50. So actually, you know, we are now going to live 50% of our lives in the menopause. And I think now the understanding of this menopausal period is that it's a chronic, long-term hormone deficiency. And in the same way you wouldn't deny a diabetic their insulin, I think it's really important to think, well, why are we denying women hormone replacement that can actually improve their quality of life massively? So for me, I mean, in America, you know, and even in England, there are a lot of aesthetics nurses who prescribe BRHT, and there's a huge anti-aging medicine movement in the States. But for me, HRT is about the long-term health consequences of not taking it. So for me, it's about, you know, your cardiovascular risk goes up, your osteoporosis risk goes up. It's about brain health. I mean, we need our brains. We need to be able to function. And, you know, a lot of the joys of life, you know, reading a book, retaining the information, having, you know, conversations and debates, we need our brain power. And estrogen, progesterone and testosterone are very, very, very potent neurosteroids. So the structure of the brain does change in the menopause if you don't take HRT. Memory is a particular issue. So a lot of women get so frustrated with, you know, problems with word finding. Their memory's not as sharp. You know, you go upstairs to get something and get to the top of the stairs and forget. What did I come up here for? You know,
I thought I was getting dementia. I was like, oh no, this must be early onset of dementia.
But we know as well that Alzheimer's dementia risk is considerably reduced by being on HRT. So there's a professor in States called Professor Dale Bredesen, and he's got this thing called the Bredesen protocol, and this is a functional medicine approach for managing patients with Alzheimer's, and balancing their hormones even when they're 75 is actually really, really important. So keeping their bodies at physiological hormone ranges of the different sex hormones is really, really vital as part of his treatment.
You've touched on a really big key point there, actually, because a lot of people worry like, oh, well, I can't be on hormone replacement therapy for X number of years. And then you've got a lot of older women who think, well, I'm too old to get it. So 70-year-old might deny herself
Yeah, yeah.
feeling better because
I mean, there is a window of opportunity. So we say that the earlier you start, the better. So the earlier in your menopause you start, the better it is for the long-term health benefits. But there's a 10-year window of opportunity. So even if your period stopped 5 years ago, it's okay for you to start HRT. Now, what I really like about the bioidentical world is that we can start you on quite low doses. So if you've been without your hormones for 5 years, what happens is that a lot of the receptors in your tissues that have receptors for those hormones, the receptor sites have downregulated a little bit. So if we give you a big dose of hormone, probably you might start getting side effects. Whereas if we start you off, the start low and go slow philosophy, then we can slowly increase your doses. And I'm quite happy to put people on 50% of the dose of what they would have in conventional HRT if they're happy with that and if it controls their symptoms. And very often it does, it's enough. And then together with lifestyle changes and balancing the other hormones, you can actually get them to optimum health with minimum risk. And that's what we need to try and aim for.
Perfect, because it's what I wanted to come back to, Ghazala, which is this whole functional medicine certification and the way your journey's gone yourself, for yourself rather, and this importance of lifestyle and food. I mean, just to press upon this point, women coming into their 40s, early 50s, we're juggling careers. Often women at that point are reaching the peak or really getting that traction and seniority in their respective careers. We're child raising. We've got responsibilities, potentially some of us, of aging parents, ill parents. And I'm not sure, again, it's this modern woman in the menopause. You've talked about rather this longer lifestyle. And it brings me upon, at the moment I'm qualifying to become an Optimized Me, which is a transformational life coach, and working on the certification. And it was extraordinary coming across Dr. Mark
Hyman, yeah, he's very big in functional medicine.
And he connected the dots of this largely invisible crisis, right? And understanding why fixing our food system is central to the health and well-being of the population. And it's all mixed in with profit and greed, because actually there seems to be a cost impact that you need to have more money to afford better food, which is then going to impact and give you a better lifestyle. And I just want to read a quote from it. Wendy Beryl, this isn't from the book, this is a separate quote from her. She says that people are fed by the food industry, pay no attention to health, and are healed by the health industry, which also pays no attention to food. So tell me about a perimenopausal and menopausal woman, food and lifestyle. What would you be telling her in your clinic?
So really, really important to look at what you're eating. So what we know is that for women in the perimenopause and menopause, it's really important for them to have a low GI diet. So this is one of the massive myths that has happened for decades, is that actually low fat diets were the vogue. But low fat means that you're having more carbohydrates and more processed carbohydrates. And actually, it's that is not helping people's weight. So essentially, this is what's happened with more processed carbohydrates. You have a sudden rush of sugar in your blood, your insulin resistance goes up, and then you're more likely to have be overweight or obese. So low GI diet is really important, where you're eating unprocessed carbohydrates, whole grains, things like quinoa, buckwheat, couscous, and not white pasta, white bread, white potatoes. I love this quote: the whiter your bread, the sooner you're dead, which is one of our functional medicine quotes. So it's really important, a low GI. Now, the fats that we put into our body are really, really important. So it's really important that we have our omega-3s. So omega-3s come from fatty fish, they come from nuts and seeds. Vegetarian sources aren't always as good as the fish sources, but they're okay. And also monounsaturated fats like olive oil and the oils that you find in seeds and nuts. These are really important for our health. Now, all of our sex hormones, people don't know this, are synthesized from cholesterol. So if we don't have enough cholesterol, we're not making enough of we're not giving our bodies the substrates they need to make our sex hormones. And good fats are really important for brain health. They're really important for your body. So fats, the right fats, are really important. What we need to avoid is trans fats, and also omega-6, which is found in vegetable oils. So all deep fried foods that are done in vegetable oils, they have a lot of omega-6. And it's very important for our bodies to have a balance between the omega-3 and omega-6. So we need a lot more omega-3 and a lot less omega-6. The other thing is supplements are really important, I think, in this period of time. So my top supplements are a multivitamin with high doses of the B vitamins in, because the B vitamins are really important for all aspects of our metabolism. Vitamin D is really important for your sex hormones. It is actually a hormone itself, so adequate vitamin D levels. Magnesium is really good in the menopausal period, and then, as we said, omega-3 supplements I think can be really helpful too. And then don't forget the benefits of the fruit and vegetables. This is key. So phytonutrients are really important for all aspects of our health. So one of the modules I've recently done in functional health is the detox module. And so when we're talking about the risks of HRT, a lot of the issues and the risks with breast cancer are because some people do not metabolize their estrogen very well, or their diet means that they are not providing their body with the nutrients that helps the detoxification of estrogen in your liver. So estrogen is made and it's got to be cleared, or if you take it in HRT, it's got to be cleared from your body, because if the estrogen level builds up, that's what gives you the increased risk. So what we know is that the processes of the liver that are encouraged, the detoxification of estrogen, are reliant on phytonutrients. So, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, they are amazing at clearing estrogen from your body. The other place that we clear estrogen is where it's excreted from our guts. So if you get constipated, you're not clearing your estrogen very well. So the other really, really important thing is soluble fiber. So one of the big things in functional medicine, and also in ancient systems of medicine, is gut health. So we now know scientifically it's the microbiome or the microbiota, which are the organisms that live in our gut. There's trillions of them, and these actually live in symbiosis with our bodies, and they have crucial roles in metabolism, creating neurotransmitters, metabolizing your hormones, all sorts of things. So without an adequate gut microbiome that's balanced, our bodies can't be healthy.
No, and they say it's your second brain, and I'm just buzzing with everything you've shared, and I'll tell you why. And ladies, I know this works. I know it works, because I'm going to share with you something that I wasn't planning to share. But post my IVF, actually, Ghazala, I ended up with really chronic IBS, and it's lasted for about 10 years. And then I started to get all my perimenopausal symptoms. The biggest symptom, which has been tinnitus, actually, that really confused me. Plus, I was noticing the weight gain. And through Optimize and the coaching program, Brian Johnson, who runs Optimize, talks about the fundamentals. Now, the basic fundamentals, which if you make strong in your life, will transform every other aspect of your life, is eating, moving, and sleeping. You get that right, the pillar of you as a soul in the human body completely shifts and changes. And part of this program introduced me to this awakening of, okay, I have this problem, this IBS, I have this perimenopause. What am I actually doing that is the most loving and kindest thing to the system? And the number one area was food. And I actually went on to this ketogenic switch program, thanks to a friend of mine, Julie Matthias, who introduced me to it. Started taking the magnesium and all the vitamins you've talked about, and the vitamin C through Altrium, which is this liquid form. And 6 months later, the kilos dropped off, 6 kilos lighter. But not just that, the shift to the IBS. I mean, this is the first year in 10 years, Ghazala, that I have healthy poo. And when you say the gut and this, you know, it is the second brain. And Susan Treadgold, who I mentioned earlier, who developed breast cancer, she was one who educated massively. She brought Dr. Axe's program to me about what are the right things for really good gut health. And this is important whether you're in the menopause, not the menopause, whether you're a man or a woman.
Absolutely.
Get your fundamentals of food right in an industry where 9 out of 10 of the food aisles in any grocery store feed you what the food industry wants you to be buying, because that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But it may not be right for us. Also triggered me to set up my own little herb patch in the garden.
Well, herbs are amazing. I mean, herbs and spices. So, you know, when I'm thinking back to, you know, the sort of unprocessed Indian food that was brought up as a kid, you know, actually it was full of all the good things. So prebiotics that your gut bacteria love are onions and garlic and ginger, and then turmeric. I mean, my mum puts turmeric in everything, and actually we now know that it's really, really, really healthy.
I grew up with my mum literally forcing us to have haldi milk, haldi doodh, you know, a little bit of milk with haldi in it. And I used to get, hate it. Now you're buying a turmeric latte for like £4 down in Starbucks, and you're like, seriously?
So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and that's what I love about functional medicine. I mean, you know, Ayurvedic principles, for instance, you know, it's all about, you know, first heal the gut, you know, and the elimination diet that we will put people on when, you know, we're trying to solve their health problems. It's very similar to some of the principles in Ayurveda, in traditional Chinese medicine, where you're looking at the body as a whole, and not just one organ.
And Ghazala, I'm guessing it does differ, right? Because things like grains, for example, really don't suit my system. So like the couscous and even lentils, dal, unfortunately, it just doesn't work for me. And it triggers irritability in my bowel. So I'm guessing there's no, again, one shoe fits all solution.
Definitely not. And that's the thing, you know, say in the functional medicine principles, say we're trying to treat someone's chronic illness, you know, chronic health condition with the functional medicine approach. Very often, say if they've got an autoimmune condition, we'll start with an elimination diet, and that will be eliminating gluten, dairy, eggs, meat, and it will be largely you know, a plant-based diet, and then what we will do after 4 weeks is that we'll start gradually reintroducing. So people then have to work out, you know, what can they tolerate, what they can't tolerate. I mean, there's also testing that can be done, but a lot of it is, you know, people kind of know what you know, what's good for them and what's not good for them. But I think, you know, when we investigate the gut, so essentially in functional medicine, we do gut testing, which looks at the balance of the bacteria in your gut. It looks at things like short chain fatty acids. It looks at things like butyrate levels. It looks at lots of different things, which secretory IgA, which give you indications of your general health. And then we can actually, if we find that you've got what we call a leaky gut in functional medicine, where the gut membrane is compromised in some way, there is a program for about 5 or 6 weeks which we can use to actually heal your gut. And we do use a lot of botanicals, so things like oregano, berberine, grapefruit seed. These things are all very, very important in healing your gut. So we can, you know, in a very systematic way, look at your gut, heal the gut, and then, you know, people generally feel a lot better, and actually a lot of their other health issues do improve.
I was just going to say, so since I cut out, I noticed wheat, or cut back drastically on wheat, my eczema cleared up. And as soon as I start to reintroduce it, it flares up again. And oregano, oh my God, hilarious. Earlier this year, a good friend of mine, Armina, introduced me to oregano oil. Vile to take. I couldn't take it with the olive oil, so I end up taking it with a fish oil instead. But, you know, this is the oil from the ancient Greek goddesses. Like, they would all be on oregano oil. So this ancient wisdom, you know, it's really, really reassuring having this conversation with you, Ghazala, because I think it's the moment that we're all experiencing where we are really starting to go deep into all the cultural conditionings and layers of beliefs that have come through centuries and decades, to start to really explore as women what is really working for our systems and find that for ourselves. We don't need a masculine and male driven food and medical system to tell us what ancient wisdom has known for years. For those of you interested, I've got another follow-up of this series on the modern woman and the menopause, and there I'll be talking to a womb specialist. I'm also going to be speaking to another functional medical doctor, as well as a homeopath, actually, who specialises in homeopathy and the menopause. So it's really brilliant, actually, to bring all of this together. And because I just want to say thank you so much. I've certainly learned a hell of a lot. And yeah, just if there are any final comments that you'd like to share for anyone.
I think I'd love to have a quick word about nutrigenomics. So we now are able, through the Human Genome Project, we're now able to map out people's individual genetics. So for people who feel that they have an increased breast cancer risk, what we can actually do is we can map out your estrogen detoxing genetics. So we can actually take a swab from the mouth, and we can look at your DNA, and we can look at where there might be defects genetically in the pathways, in the enzymes that are involved in liver detoxification of your estrogen. So, you know, there's a lot we can do in the functional medicine world and in the world of nutrigenomics to actually, again, fine tune your individual experience of taking HRT and, you know, your individual risk of, say, you know, I think I've got an increased risk of breast cancer. Well, let's have a look at what's happening in your liver and how you detox things. So that may be, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you, because it's again, it's kind of knowing. I think what you've said is beautiful, and really beautiful and appropriate to end on, which is we need to reconnect with our own intuition.
Definitely.
Ignore what we're told and follow that innate wisdom that, you know, channels through God to all of us over what is appropriate and most right for us. And little by little, look at each fear and put it in its appropriate place. So thank you so much. And, you know, just to remind you that Dr. Ghazala Aziz-Scott, she practices at the Marion Gluck Clinic, Oxbridge graduated doctor who now focuses very much and specialises in women's health, the perimenopause, menopause, and has combined functional medicine along, and you use it actively in the practice. So thank you so much, Ghazala. Thank you.
Welcome.